Well, hey everybody, it is Romania Black, and we are on episode 9 of Dororo! Yeah! So, I've got quite a few comments to go through related to the series, but I'm really enjoying it so far. Episode 6 was a lot. and and I feel like episode 7 and 8 have been a nice little kind of wind down, re-cleanse, replenish from that state, and now we're moving back into the series. As I talked about last week, how episode 7 and 8 approach relationships and love and monsters from very different angles, which is really good. So I'm very curious to see where we go to from there. But we have quite a few comments to get through that have come in from you all commenting, which is awesome. So I want to kind of tie into those before we start the episode. Anime Annie talks about how Biwamaru, when Hyakkimaru started getting his hearing back, takes a somewhat more forceful method of trying to get Hyakkimaru used to sounds, whereas Dororo's is a much more gentle approach for Hyakkimaru to slowly get used to and understand them. Anime Annie says, I can understand both schools of thoughts, and it's hard to say which one is the better choice for Hyakkimaru. As you've mentioned, the return of his senses could be a hindrance to him. So in that regard, because Hyakkimaru isn't willing to be patient when there's a nearby demon to kill, the bulldozer method of Biwamaru might be better, but the softer method would be better in the long term. And I wondered if by the end of episode 5 and episode 6, if Biwamaru kind of realized that, realizing that the bulldozer method, like Hyakkimaru is very stubborn, very human, very stubborn. But maybe he realized that Dororo's methods were going to, in the long term, be more effective. And so because Biwamaru maybe knows that he is stubborn, he's like, fine, then I'm going to go off, let you do your thing, and I'll come back when you figured things out. Maybe that's the case. We'll have to wait and see if he comes back in the next episode or so. But I think that that's a really good point to bring out. And so I appreciate the Anime Annie for making that comment. Pixie Dust and Fire says, at the end of episode 5, Hyakkimaru loses a leg, but gains his voice back. And I thought this was interesting. That implies that demons cannot hold on to more than one body part. It was like a swap. Then in episode 6, he manages to kill the demon and thankfully gets his leg back. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, I had not thought of it that way. I was very curious as to why he got his voice back despite losing the leg, because it makes you think that he killed the demon when in reality he didn't. But that makes more sense, that the demons can only have one body part at a time. They can't be too greedy. They only get one per contract. So maybe the demons prevent each other from taking more than what they are owed. Your guess is as good as mine, but I thought that was really cool. So thank you for bringing that up, Pixie Dust and Fire. That's good to note in the future, that the demons can't take more than one. Maybe that means that Hyakkimaru won't lose any more limbs anytime soon. We can only hope. Yikes. And then this commentator, their name is in Japanese, so I cannot say it because I can't read Japanese, but they said on YouTube, the translation is ambiguous. So some people tend to misunderstand it. Dororo's mother did not die because of prostitution. She died for other reasons, like starvation, because she chose not to engage in prostitution. I don't consider that a spoiler, because you were just interpreting, you're basically confirming the translation from the subtitles. So I don't consider that a spoiler if the show directly states it and it's a translation issue. Now, if a show states something and I just miss it, but it's going to come back later on, I'd rather wait and find it later on. But in this case, I think it's fine. And the moderators were fine letting me know this, because they're like, well, it was just a translation error. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, so the idea is Dororo's mother basically starved to death or something similar. But she did it because she chose not to do what Mio is doing out of her own pride. That makes sense. And it adds a lot of layers to Mio and Dororo's conversation. I am pretty sure that we're going to get a flashback of Dororo's parents at some point and find out Dororo's like lineage and whatever, because it seems to be relatively important if it's in the OP. But I can't decide if this is going to be a 2-cour series. I know it's 24 episodes where we get to like the 12 episode mark and then we do a new cour, or if it's going to be the same OP throughout the entire thing. I don't know. So if that's the case, I was thinking the flashback of Dororo and his backstory is going to come like, you know, in the 18 episode mark or something like that. But if this is a 2-cour series with 2 OPs, we see them in the OP, so it's probably going to happen before episode 12 or 13. I don't know. I don't want to think too much in core OP logic, because then that leads to kind of like you being spoiled as you watch. But it's just it's in my mind, so I wanted to say it out loud, so I'm transparent with you all. But Indianka says, what's interesting is that this is mind blowing. I don't know why I didn't put 2 and 2 together, because I was like, wait, what? But yeah, Hiroki Suzuki, who is Hyakkimaru's VA, and Ryo Suzuki, who is Dororo's VA, are siblings in real life. They're siblings. I was like, wait a minute, because Hiroki Suzuki is not an anime voice actor. They've done live action shows and dramas, but they're not an anime voice actor. This is like their first role. And Dororo's voice actress, she was 13 or 14 when voicing Dororo, and has done work since then. I'm like, oh my God. And now it makes sense. I'm like, why would they hire this person who's not done anime to be the voice actor? But if it's their sibling, that adds another dynamic to them performing together. I'm living for that, because that means that there's going to be some amazing moments with these voice actors, and knowing that they're siblings in real life, and that dynamic and the emotion that can bring with it, just insane. It says Hiroki Suzuki also played Hyakkimaru in the stage play that was running around the same time as the anime aired. Well, good for him. Also, good for him. An interesting work if you're into stage plays. I have watched stage plays. I've done a few reactions of Bungo Stray Dogs stage plays. I would like to watch more stage plays. It's just kind of hard to find them with English subtitles that are available. I've watched a given stage play, but they were very adamant that you could not record reactions to it, so I could just watch it and talk about it. And then the Bungo Stray Dogs stage play I watched, I did do a recording. It is on this channel. But again, I want to honor the rights that the stage play offers, and so reactions are very limited with them. Like, you have to do, you can't do like a full PIP, you have to do whatever, and you can't use sound or audio, so it's a very intricate process to record them and edit them. So, but I would love to watch more stage plays. I'm not I can watch a musical stage play if the music is catchy, but sometimes a straight stage play I prefer more, so it just depends on the subject matter. Like Haikyuu has stage plays. I've watched a few of them in my own time. I'm not into the musical aspect of it. It's too cheesy for me. The musical volleyball, it's too cheesy for me. I can't. But the actual acting parts of it, where it's like the straight play, I could watch that. That part's amazing, and their cast is just incredible. But yeah, it depends on the subject matter whether it works as a musical or not. That's just how it goes. But anyway, actually, I discovered that Dororo anime, since I knew him from the Token Rambu stage plays, as well as Tahumaru's stage actor. Interesting. So I like that these stage actors that play these characters have done other roles like that. That's so cool. And then Mio's song is sung by Junko Yamamoto. Is a song by Junko Yamamoto, Akai Hana Shiroi Hana from the 90s. Actually, it was originally created in 1970, but has been covered many times. That makes sense too. I feel like choosing a song from the 70s to sing in this anime is kind of a nod to the fact that this original anime came out in 1969 and probably ran through 1970. So it's just like a callback to the actual source material. And who knows, the actual song could have been popular in 1970 and was used at that time for a reason, what have you. And then Hazy Days 9921 says, when you mentioned Daigo and Tahumaru's conversation about war, it's another parallel between Jukai and Daigo. Sending the boys off to fight feels like an extension of the parallel between their training scenes. Whereas Daigo is keeping Tahumaru home, Jukai decides to let Hyakkimaru go out to fight the demons. Daigo doesn't think Tahumaru is ready and has more to learn, while Jukai feels that he's not capable of teaching Hyakkimaru anymore. Both maybe are parents making the right or wrong decision for their specific kid, but I don't think it's cut and dry. Of course not. Jukai has a lot of baggage and self-esteem issues behind the choice to send Hyakkimaru away, and considering the parallel, I wonder if part of Daigo's motivation is the opposite. He's not ready for Tahumaru to understand the world outside of his father's influence. I absolutely love that, and there's a little bit more to their comment, but first of all, I love that parallel because, yeah, you have Jukai, who has realized that his influence on Hyakkimaru could have negative side effects, so he wants to send him away because he's afraid that he's going to do more harm than good, and that connects to his own self-esteem, when in reality, he is this good soul, versus Daigo, who we know is not the best of souls, who decides to not send Tahomaru away because he doesn't want Tahomaru to figure out things and realize his dad's kind of a shitty person. So it's like you have one parent wanting to relinquish control because he's realized what effect he could have on his kid, and he's like, oh, I don't want to influence my kid anymore. And then you have a parent that's doing the exact opposite, that's like, oh, I don't want you to be out of my control because then you'll realize how horrible of a person I am. Love it. Hazy Days also says, I don't think Daigo ever expected Tahomaru to see real combat in a war that he could actually lose. I'm not saying that sending a 15 or 14-year-old would be a good decision, but contextually, Tahomaru is older than most sons of a samurai would be, and he might be about the right age for his trial into adulthood, depending on the exact time period that we're in. Point being, now that I'm thinking about it, it's possible Daigo is sheltering Tahomaru physically, but perhaps ideologically, even though his decision seems pretty reasonable. Yeah, when you put it in perspective of the time period, he is holding Tahomaru back, but you could say it is partially out of love because Daigo is human after all, but also because of control and his fear and own self, projections of insecurities. So fun times. And then finally, Moomin says this is the first time in episode 6 that we see Hyakkimaru kill a human or lots of them. There is a definite difference between killing the demon to gain your body back and killing humans out of rage. I can't even say it's for revenge. He is truly reactionary at this point. Yeah, that's kind of one of the things about Hyakkimaru that is so good, but also so dangerous. And that is the fact that a lot of his actions are not because he's thinking of revenge or being manipulative, but they're just instinctual or reactionary based on his emotions. And while that makes him look good in some senses, it's also terrifying. So I have talked for over 10 minutes. So thank you all so much for your kind words and comments. Keep them coming. I'm enjoying reading them. They're so much fun, but we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to start episode 9 of Dororo, and we are going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, okay, so Dororo's a girl. All right, I stand corrected. Honestly, like I said in the ED, it matters for reasons we're going to talk about, but it at the same time doesn't matter because I feel like Dororo, what I love about their character is that they are kind of androgynous in a sense for a reason, as we'll talk about. But I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether Dororo is a girl or a boy. Like, there's a lot of reasons why all of these things now kind of make sense and add up. And I like that Dororo's a girl, but I think we're going to talk about it. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's not as relevant to Dororo's character in ways that we stereotypically would think that they are, but we'll talk about it as we go. But it's good to have some confirmation. And then it's like, what a sweet sister you have. And it's like, so we're going to talk about this episode. Man, this episode was sad. Really sad. I didn't think we were getting the parent backstory until like 6 episodes from now, but no, we do. And now we have it. And it looks like Tahomaru is about to get some focus, which is going to be very interesting. It seems like he's maybe being like, what's going on? What about this baby? Why does it matter whether this baby has limbs or not? What's going on? What are you hiding from me? I hope Tahomaru gets answers. I do. But I'm afraid the way in which he's going to get answers is what concerns me. So what do we do with that? But with that being said, I am really excited to see where the story goes from here. But this was a really sad episode. The funny part is, or the not funny part is, I didn't cry like I did in episode 6 because, one, we knew that the parents were dead. So that kind of like, we knew the parents were going to die and that they were dead. And the reasons were really sad. But honestly, I was kind of distracted by how beautiful this episode was animated. The story, the idea choice of having it completely black and white with the color spot of red to not only tie to the spider lilies, but to tie to blood, to tie to violence, to tie to the fire and flames and passion and burning, like the destruction, but also to tie to that passion. It was such a great decision to make for the show. It made me wonder if because in the original 1969 version, it's in black and white as well. So I wonder if that was tying back to that or what it meant with it. I thought it was really, really well done. And I thought that it was very aesthetically pleasing to watch this episode. And I was just kind of distracted by how glorious everything looked in the flashback. Also, making it a flashback and doing the color spotting is really nice. I feel like going back, the Jukai flashback kind of was in sepia tones. So doing just a different style for that. But the fact that the spider lily stands out to Dororo and why he hates and why they hate it so much, I feel like now I don't know what to do with Dororo. I don't know the pronoun to use because I guess it'd be she, but at the same time I want to say they because Dororo doesn't really ascribe at all. They're trying to pass off as a boy for reasons, and they're at the age where they can do that successfully. So we'll talk more about that, but I just thought that the spider lily and the red tones were really well. Now, Dororo does not realize that since Hyakkimaru can smell flowers and smell things now, that it's become an all-consuming thing. Also, one of my friends pointed this out. We were talking about this at work the other day. My coworker was like, they were talking about, this is so wild to me, that their cousin's friend has a cancer in their vocal cords, and they're getting it treated right now. And they were trying to figure out what to do. And the modern science is amazing, but they've found a way they can take the voice box out of a person and take a muscle from the thigh and transfer the thigh muscle to the vocal cords, and it can regenerate into their voice box. And I'm like, what? Just science is amazing. But we were talking about that and how revolutionary that was through whatever procedure they're doing. And we were like, we basically came to the conclusion that losing any sensory organ would suck, especially if you were used to using it. Like for Hyakkimaru, it's kind of going in reverse. He's figuring out what these sensations are. But if you've had those sensations and then you lose them, you know what you're losing, right? So we were like, well, is there anything you could do? And I was like, well, you need touch, you need sight, you need sound. And then we talked about, I was like, well, what if you lost your sense of smell? You wouldn't be able to smell bad smells anymore. Would that be okay? And then my coworker was like, yeah, that's all fine and good. But then your sense of smell is connected to your sense of taste. And I was like, oh, and we're both foodies. So we're like, oh, well, then your food wouldn't taste as good anymore. And that got me thinking in this episode, because Hyakkimaru has never had the sense of smell, has he not had the sense of taste? So now that he has a sense of smell, is the fish going to taste good now? These are things to think about. But then, when Hyakkimaru went and sniffed Dororo's hair and Dororo was like, oh, stop it. I kind of wondered now, looking back, if Dororo wanted Hyakkimaru to keep his distance because he didn't want Hyakkimaru to figure out that Dororo is a girl. Which before, if you look, Dororo can't sense gender because Dororo can only see the shape of a soul. And the shape of a soul is only reflective of their stamina and their well-being, not if they're a boy or a girl. So, but anyway, let's get past the intro here. Thank God a nun was on the scene, because I love the farmer that's like, oh, I'm not taking responsibility for this kid and for you, not doing that. But I'm glad the nun showed up, of all people. That was the most coincidental, best thing possible. And then we get the backstory of Dororo and their family. And Dororo says all of this not knowing that Hyakkimaru is listening, because they don't know that Hyakkimaru is there with the water, and talks about her parents and does all this. So I think that there's some interesting things to note about here. Itachi was reminding me of, at first I was like, oh, kind of reminds me of Usopp from One Piece. But then as I was thinking about it, they also remind me of Corcus from Berserk. And then as the episode went on even further, I was like, oh, no, Itachi is Corcus from Berserk. So, again, the reasons this series replaced Berserk is becoming more and more apparent, But there's some interesting things. So Dororo being a girl, Dororo means wild or wild beast. So part of me wonders if the dad gave Dororo that name to mask the fact that Dororo is a girl, because if you're growing up in this world, as we have seen, growing up as a woman in this time period is not exactly easy. And maybe the dad was like, okay, well, we're just going to hide the fact that she's a girl, and try to like let her live out. But also part of me kind of felt like there was a little bit more of like a kind of a feminist vibe with this tribe, because the mom is right there with them. Like she's on the battlefield with them. She's not like tucked away in a tent somewhere doing the cooking and living her trad wife life. No, the mom is right out there front and center with Dororo's dad. So part of me felt like there might have been a little bit, not exactly matriarchal, but a little bit more of the women are just as important in the tribe as the men. Now, she's the only woman there, so maybe it's just because she's his wife and that's how he views her. But that kind of led me to believe, I feel like Itachi knows that Dororo is a girl. I feel like Itachi knows. Maybe the tribe knew as well. Maybe the clan knew and the army knew that Dororo was a girl. But I feel like Itachi knows. And if Itachi doesn't know, then that's a good thing. But to Dororo's credit, one, Dororo's family, great genetics. Her mom is beautiful. Her dad is handsome. Like, to Dororo's credit, great genetics. Good for you. You don't have to worry about Daigo on Hyakkimaru. Hyakkimaru is lucky that they take after their mom. But Dororo, you got both, best of both worlds, right? And so I also feel like the way that Dororo's face is, Dororo looks like their mom, but they have their dad's like hair. And so I think, and kind of facial features a little bit. So that helps. I basically look like my dad's dad with a wig on. I have the same shaped face as my grandfather. I kind of have like more of a jawline like my grandfather. I feel like my face at times has a little bit more masculine features to it. I could be wrong. Maybe that's just body dysmorphia and what I'm thinking, but I've always felt that. I've always felt like when I was younger, when I was like, I feel like now I look at young girls, and especially in America, they're all like, a lot of them have very feminine attributes that are kind of played up for that. When I was a kid, from ages like 7 to 14, I looked very androgynous. I kind of feel why Dororo gets away with it, because from like 7 to 14, I looked very androgynous. I had like a bowl cut, big glasses. I looked very boyish. I have a very small chest. So it was passed off. Dororo could pass off as a guy for a long time. And I can feel that because I felt the same way growing up. I felt very androgynous, and I did not feel like a feminine young girl at all. So I feel like they're playing that up in this series because of the world that they live in. They don't want Dororo to be targeted. Like, a young boy is not going to be targeted like a young girl, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't want young boys to be targeted either. But the way that this world works, especially during times of war, it's like, I'm glad that Dororo passes off as a young boy. But yeah, but it makes more sense now why the dad keeps Dororo very close. But also, I like the idea that Dororo wants to hear the conversations they're having about the fighting clans and all this. Dororo surprisingly has grown up in an environment surrounded by war and bloodshed. And despite all of that, Dororo is very empathetic and kind. And I think that's because their parents were both very kind and considerate despite what's going on, but mainly the influence and what the mom was telling Dororo. Like when they fight the samurai, and Itachi and the dad look at each other and kind of smile, and they have blood all over their face. And Dororo's like, you just killed a bunch of people. The mom saying that he's still your father is such an important line, because it's the mom saying, despite what's happened, he's still him. He still loves you. He's still a good person, despite what's going on. And that's so powerful, because then we see that transferred later on to Dororo talking to Hyakkimaru. And it also makes sense of why Dororo doesn't want Hyakkimaru to become a demon, because they've been around bloodshed and violence their whole life. They see how it changes people. They see how it influences people. Itachi was someone that Dororo thought their family could trust, and he sold them out because of the circumstance of the war and because they were trying to survive. And they're a jerk, as Dororo says. So you can definitely see a lot of what has played into Dororo's thinking and mindset and ideology based on how they have been brought up in this episode. And honestly, Dororo has kind of been pretty nuanced for a young kid for a while, and kind of ahead of the game as a young kid for a while. And when we first met Dororo as the thief, as the scamp running away from burglars, I was like, Dororo just seems like a little street urchin. How do they know all of this stuff and have all of this nuanced emotion? now it makes sense because of where they've grown up at in the middle of this tribe. And it feels like Dororo has just grown up with them. There's no other women. There's no other kids. Dororo has grown up around adults their entire life. So that's why they're so mature despite their young age. They've just been surrounded by adults. They don't really know how to act around kids. Also, side note, now that we know Dororo is a girl, it makes a lot more sense why Dororo, when they've been interacting with other kids their age, have not been at the same time, have not been like in the same room sleeping. It makes sense why they've been in different quarters, because Dororo doesn't want anybody to find out that they're a girl, because they're afraid of what that rationale or thinking will do to them. So there's that as well. But yeah, I just feel so bad for Dororo because their parents were such good people. And Dororo's like, well, I can beat up the bad guys too. And the mom's like, well, when you get a little bit bigger. And so I love the callback to them throwing the rocks at the target, saying, if I can't use a sword, then I'm going to use a rock to beat up the bad guys. And then they say that to Itachi. And then later when Dororo and the mom are at the shelter at the temple, they throw the rock at Itachi then to say, I'm going to beat up the bad guys. And it's a nice full circle moment. But I can't believe Itachi betrayed them. I really wasn't saying, at first I was like, man, they seem a lot like Corcus from Berserk, but they wouldn't be a jerk. I would honestly say they're worse than Corcus. At least Corcus didn't sell out people in Berserk, you know? But what's kind of interesting is that I know a little bit about samurai, not a lot about samurai, if I'm being fully honest. I watched Seven Samurai when I was really in high school, so I kind of know about Seven Samurai. I know a little bit about samurai from the westernized perceptions of them, which are not much. So I always thought of samurai as kind of, you know, like warriors that fought for their lords, for the military that they were serving. But there's also like kind of a Western depiction of samurai as sort of rogue, but at the same time stoic. And there's kind of an honorable association with samurai from my Western perspective of what's been like given through lore, that it's interesting to see the perspective of samurai kind of being used as, and when I say this phrase, I mean it in a way that I hope you think I mean it, but as war dogs. Because they kind of are. The samurai are just being used. Daigo's sending out these samurai to do his bidding. And they just seem more like just like soldiers that are amped up soldiers than what I normally would have perceived them as. So I like getting this different connotation of them and different usage of them, especially for someone like me who's outside of the culture. And then you have this band of farmers and bandits and this brigade that's developed of people that have been disenfranchised by the samurai that have kind of rounded up together. It feels very Band of the Hawk. If you know Berserk, it feels very much like a Band of the Hawk scenario, which is, again, tying back to that series. So I like that, but I also like in this series that we get the understanding that this isn't just Group A versus Group B. Much like Berserk, it is a lot of different factions against each other. Daigo's army seems to be very prevalent and fighting everyone, you know, but it's not just one side versus one side. There's all these different bands. There's all these different armies. There's all these different lords that are fighting against each other, as humanity does, as you know. But I like that it's a lot more complicated than just Group A is fighting Group B and that's it. No, there's all these different sides and all these different factors, and we get like all these different repercussions. Like we see Dororo's dad fighting, and then we see later on a samurai being like, hey, your people killed the people in my village, and that's why I'm going to kill you. And so it also displays the cycle of violence and how bad it is. And again, you know, I feel like this series is very anti-war because it shows just all the bad stuff war does. And it's not all just glorious fighting. It's also hunger and starvation and the aftermath of the people and the way families are torn apart and the violence and the cycle of it, and that just no good comes from it, essentially, right? Now, the one thing I will say about this episode, and I realize they did not have time because we're trying to squeeze this story into one moment, is that unlike the scene where Hyakkimaru fought against the men on the hill during episode 6, we don't really spend a lot of animation or time showing the battle. And there's part of me that's very fine with that, because I can see some people complaining because it's just like a little montage of screenshots. I can see some people complaining about that with the animation. I'm fine for it for a couple of reasons. One, we don't have time. There's a lot we get in this episode, and the pacing of this episode is really, really good. I wouldn't change that at all. So it's fine if we just skip over it. Two, one of the things that's really good about this series that I appreciate more than Berserk even is the fact that we don't make the violence, the sex, the stuff gratuitous. We don't need to. I've had, in reading Berserk, I'm not going to spoil things in Berserk, but as a series overall, one of my biggest complaints was that at times Miura makes that series so gratuitous and excessive. And it's a stylistic choice. And you will either be okay with it or you won't be. And I criticized it, and that's fine if people don't agree. It's fine if people are like, I didn't care if people disagreed with me and they're like, oh no, I like it. I'm like, well then good for you, fine. But one of the things that bugged me was a constant criticism was, well, but that's how it is. And that's just being real. And they're just showing, and that just makes the reader feel more for the characters if we make it gratuitous and excessive. I'm going to starkly disagree with that, because in this series, it is not excessive or gratuitous, but you get the same emotional reaction. You're like, oh shit. And honestly, one of the favorite things that I like as an author and as somebody that likes reading is understatement can be so well done. You don't have to be excessive or gratuitous to convey an emotional response. You can have things be minimalist and understated and just, here it is. And like, oh. And sometimes we as the audience and we as humans, we will fill in the gaps and make it much worse than it is. You know, you can show us a little tiny hint of something and it will come across more terrifying. And there's an example of that coming up that I want to talk about, but you can make it so much worse than it is without having to be shown it. That's like in a horror movie, when you get to a scene and they don't show you everything, they just show you a part of it. Your brain will fill in the gaps in a much worse way than that creator probably ever could. So we'll talk about it here in a minute, but I do think that the emotion is conveyed without being gratuitous so well in this episode, and it gets it across pretty damn good, right? So they move around. I love the dynamic of the mom and the dad of Dororo. Their dynamic was so beautiful. They got along. They didn't fight. They were like a symbiotic couple. They gave and take. They got along perfect. They were just like hashtag relationship goals during the war. And then both of them die, and it's so tragic. But they were both fighting till the very end to protect Dororo. Like, both of them as parents fought for their child until the very end. And it is such a stark contrast to Daigo, because Dororo's parents fought to keep Dororo alive and safe no matter what. Like, they sacrificed their lives to save Dororo. And meanwhile, you have Daigo, who literally sacrificed his child to save himself. And the parallels and contrast with that is just absolutely incredible. But yeah, I love the red tone, the use of fire, all of this. So it said that during the days of wars, brigands scourged the lands in every region. And so it said different groups, their brutality brought fear into the hearts of the helpless. So samurai who'd lost their lords formed their own bands, and the poor joined them in order to make a living. Like, this felt very Berserk, but also it's kind of like when you're in times of strife and struggle, it kind of, you know, it's not every man for himself, but it's every person joining a group that benefits them the most, right? And that kind of, it also adds to the idea of kind of the folly of war, because at the end of the day, it's like, who's winning? Everybody's just fighting for themselves and their own means of survival. So, you know, each had their own reasons for joining, as the story states. But Hibukuro is the dad. I think Ojiya is the mom, but poor Dororo. Yeah, it's so sad. And so we find out that Hibukuro, who is Dororo's dad, consists of a band of farmers, and they only assaulted samurai, which, you know, does add to kind of their moral compass, because they only attacked the people that were causing the strife with the rest they weren't attacking civilians who were defenseless. So it kind of makes them feel more like a Robin Hood band in a sense. But I will give Itachi this. I will give Itachi this. Itachi was kind of like, we should join the samurai, and was kind of hinting at the fact that the samurai were going to, you know, kind of create an upheaval with Hibakuro's band. Now, granted, it's very hypocritical because you've been fighting samurai this whole time, and now suddenly you're going to join them, and Hibakuro's like, well, my men wouldn't do that, and Itachi's like, well, I'm about to sell you out, so here's your chance. Now, I think Itachi is a jerk for not being completely transparent, but at that point, it becomes clear that Itachi is just looking out for themselves. They're not looking out for anybody but themselves, versus Hibakuro and the mom, Ojiya, seem to be looking out for everybody else. But damn. And then they all get attacked and ambushed. Itachi sells them out, and the dad gets all the arrows in his leg. And the point there where Itachi calls Hibakuro a sack of rags, like he knew he was going to die, probably from the injuries that he sustained. And he even like gives him that extra injury on his body. I thought he slit his neck at first. I thought he slit his throat and was just going to kill him then and there. And I was like, oh, that just happened. We're not going to waste any time elaborating on that. But no, he just cut him. And I'm like, back then in this environment, there's not a lot of medicine with the mom and her burned hands. Like, those wounds are going to fester and get infected. And then you're probably going to get a blood infection and you're going to die. And that's mainly what it's from. So, I mean, the dad was going to die eventually, probably because of all the wounds he sustained. It was just a matter of time. But unless he was treated. But still, I feel like Itachi knew the moment he gave him that slash that he was going to die. And so for Dororo to call out to Itachi, standing there with their little fists balled and everything, and Itachi just ignores him. Or her. Again, maybe Itachi knew that Dororo was a girl and didn't want to call it out of respect for the two of them. Because I feel like the soldiers, because, you know, hashtag ancient times, would have taken Dororo from them if they knew it was a girl. I don't know. But the craziest scene on the battlefield, the craziest scene of the episode is when they're on the battlefield looking for food amongst the dead. One, good thing they didn't eat people, because your brain will go crazy if you cannibalize. So good thing they didn't do that. But just the look on the parents' faces, if you stop and look, it is haunting. Like, the dad looks haunted that he's searching through corpses for food. The mom looks haunted that she's looking for moldy food in a bag amidst the corpses on the battlefield. And there's Dororo just standing there, not really old enough to understand. They're probably like 5 or 6 in this scene. They're not old enough to understand, like, all the carnage around them. Or they've grown up around all the carnage, so they're desensitized to the dead bodies at this point. But they don't fully understand the gravity of what's going on. And then they say, is this what hell's like? And the mom's like, no, it's probably worse. I'm like, but the part that gets me, the part I wanted to tell you about earlier with the whole gratuitous and everything, is when we go over to the soldier, when Dororo stumbles across the soldier and they cover their nose for the scent of blood, and the soldier has lost both their legs. They've crawled over to another corpse and they're eating it. That scene is very short. It's very simple. We don't get to see the guts and the blood, and we don't actually see the soldier eating the other soldier, but you know instantly what's going on. And that's all you need. You don't need to make it gratuitous to get across how terrifying that scene is. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, I appreciate the restraint and the understatement that Dororo uses, because they didn't have to. And it's actually quite terrifying. So, yay! Oh my God. But yeah. So anyway, and that's when and then again, these two parents side by side, these two parents living their life, like trying to save their child. They're just together forever, and I love it. But them explaining that the manjushage, or the spider lily, is the color of blood because it soaks up the blood of the dead. I'm like, oh, it's so damn sad. And then we get to the village where the dad dies from the soldier. Again, the cycle of violence. The soldier whose people were killed because of Hibakuro, he ends up dying fighting him and then goes. I mean, Dororo had to watch both of their parents die in front of them. What? Nope, that's absolutely horrible. So they bury the dad, and then we see a little bit of color spotting in this. For the first time, we see a couple of the little plants, the purple plants with the seeds, as the mom tries to feed Dororo. We see the red, like the yellow grass with the butterflies instantly made me think back to episode 6. And you can just see the mom deteriorating slowly. Even though Dororo doesn't look hungry, we see the mom deteriorating slowly because she's letting Dororo eat and she's not eating for herself. The other terrifying scene in this was when they walk through the village of all the dead people, and there's the mom and baby, the skeletons of them in the village. And Dororo instantly is probably like, that could be us. We could be next. We could die from starvation and our corpses just rot here in this war-torn land. Oh my God, it's terrifying. But they get to this temple. I like this one random guy who's like, hey, it's none of my business, but there's a temple up there giving food. You might want to go up there. Here's the thing. Because of it now makes even more sense, Dororo's conversation with Mio. Because Dororo and Mio talking about Mio being a sex worker to survive. One, Dororo knows that they're a woman. So Dororo knows as they grow up, if this war doesn't end, unless they become a fighter, it is a very strong possibility that they could actually be assaulted or be coerced into trying to do that for a living. And Dororo's like, my mom had all this pride and would never do that. And you could tell Dororo doesn't want to do that either. But at the same time, the mom died because, and honestly, it wasn't just the fact that the mom died from not doing the sex work. It's the fact that they just starved. Now, are they correlated together? Sure. But it wasn't, we never see her get offered to do any sexual acts. So when Dororo sees Mio doing that, Dororo realizes, oh, this was on the table and this is why you're doing it. I'm glad for Dororo's sake before this moment that we don't see in the flashback the mom being coerced or asked to have sexual acts. I thought Itachi was going to ask it at first. I thought Itachi was going to ask her to have sex with him for money. And I was like, if that happened, that is the lowest of the lows. But Itachi at least gets a little bit of a point for me because he didn't go that route. It almost felt like he respected Hibikuro still enough from beyond the grave to not ask his wife for sex, even though he probably knew she'd say no, but he could have been a total asshole and did that, but didn't. So point for him, I guess, amidst all of this. But I think he was trying to encourage her to do it because he's like, you have to start thinking smarter, and was probably looking at Dororo being like, that again is another reason why I think Itachi knows Dororo is a woman, being like, you two have to start thinking smart if you want to live. And the mom's like, hell no, we're not going to do that. Nope. The mom's just like, well, I'm going to hold out and hope this war ends so that you don't have to go through that life, Dororo. Like, anyway, maybe Dororo can go back to Saru. So maybe Dororo and Hyakkimaru can go back to Saru and his sister, and they can all live happily ever after. Maybe we can go back to that. Maybe we can do that. That seems like a great life. I feel like Saru and Dororo would be fine together. And Hyakkimaru, maybe him and the girl can get along. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, but I feel like now that conversation between Mio and Dororo has an extra layer to it. And another reason why Dororo hides that they're a woman is because they don't want to be in that position to have that be an option. Right? But damn, the scene, I figured that she would get to the front of the line and ask for food for Dororo and not herself. But when she held out her hands to take the scalding soup to feed her child and not herself, just, that's insane. The sacrifice that mom made for Dororo. Also, the fact that when the mom stopped Dororo from throwing the rock, she didn't want Dororo to get in trouble because then there would be a possibility of revealing that Dororo was a girl. Right? Dororo has a lot of her dad's features, which I know a lot of women that look like their fathers. So that does not surprise me, but damn, I just feel for Dororo and the mom in this moment that she's just trying to feed her child. And even Itachi's kind of like, damn girl, like that is so badass that she would scald her hands and burn them to feed her only child and not feed herself. And she just holding the child, trying to protect her. You can't live on strength alone from here on out. You've got to be smart or you'll die. I think that's another reason why Dororo hides their gender, is because they've got to be smart or they'll die. They're much more likely, unfortunately, hashtag not feminism in these times. It was much easier to survive as a young man out there because it's privilege. You're not as targeted as much. If you're a young boy, they're just like, oh, you're just another young kid. Whereas if you're a young girl, unfortunately, there's a lot of predators who would target Dororo if they knew that. But one thing I do like about this is that, not the mom dying, the spider lily scene is absolutely heartbreaking. We don't know what the dad tells the mom and Dororo when he dies. We don't know what he said, and I feel like that's going to come back in a future episode. I always hate whenever they cut to the dad or mom or somebody saying something, they're like, because you're like, what does that mean? And I can't speak or read Japanese, so I don't know what they're saying. And so I'm like, son of a bitch, you're going to have to make me wait to see if it comes back later on in a future episode. How dare you? How dare you? But yeah, that's what ends up happening. So yeah, she's like, come here, Dororo. The war will end someday, so you mustn't lose to it until then. And there's so many levels with that. There's so many levels where it's like, you mustn't lose to the war. You have to survive. You can't let the war make you a monster. Don't let it make you a demon, like what Dororo is trying to do for Hyakkimaru. Don't lose to it and give in and try to be desperate. There's just so many layers to what she tells Dororo in that moment. And it blows my mind how mature Dororo is to take all of that in and soak it in and adjust it to, I mean, they're probably like, what, 10 in this series? Like, for a 10-year-old kid to do that? And it makes sense now, Dororo being like the little thief scamp and everything to survive. But them saying, I won't say I'm hungry anymore, so don't die. So freaking sad. And it says, that's why I'm never going to give up. Oh. And then the nun looks over to Hyakkimaru and says, I don't know how you two are related, but it must be difficult traveling with such a young girl. And Hyakkimaru's like, oh. One thing I do kind of like about this is that they're like, I pray that Buddha will bless you on your journey. And Hyakkimaru's like, I didn't realize they were a girl. Okay. One thing I like about this is that you have Hyakkimaru, who has a little sister now and a little brother. Because it's not going to be one thing that, you know, in hindsight, that is going to be nice about it is that Hyakkimaru has a little sister and a little brother. They won't have to compete to be the best little brother, right? Because I was kind of thinking about that. I was like, when I know Taromaru and Hyakkimaru will eventually meet and they'll probably go through turmoil and strife and what have you, I can only pray and hope as a viewer that by the end of this, Hyakkimaru and Taromaru can see eye to eye and maybe realize that their dad is a terrible person together, whatever. But I was always kind of worried because Taromaru already has a complex about being the less favored brother of the two. I'm like, that complex would be even worse if Taromaru was like, well, I'm not even the favorite little brother. There's Dororo. But knowing Dororo is a girl, it's like, no, we got a brother and sister. Got some sibling dynamic going on. It's fine. But yeah. So then Dororo gets better. Just had the 3-day fever. Just a temporary cold. And they're like, I don't remember anything that happened. And Hyakkimaru's like, well, you told me your life story. So there you go. But then they're like, oh, thanks for not leaving me behind. Which is so interesting because on the one hand, Dororo's parents never left Dororo behind. That wasn't it. It was the fact that they left Dororo behind because they died, right? And that explains why Dororo has been so keen on making sure Hyakkimaru doesn't hurt themselves, that they don't die, because Dororo's like, I've already lost 2 parents. I don't want to lose my brother too. And why they're so protective of Hyakkimaru, but also, you know, Biwamaru's left them behind. So it kind of, there's layers. Again, the series is layers. It's a damn onion. And it feels like you're peeling onions when you watch it sometimes. But I think the fact that Hyakkimaru doesn't say anything speaks a lot as well, because we don't exactly know what he's thinking. He's like, oh, she washed my clothes too. And that's when Dororo realized that their clothes were taken off. And they blush because they realize, they're like, did the nun say anything about me? And Hyakkimaru can't see, so it's not that he saw that Dororo was a girl, but the look on Hyakkimaru's face is like, yeah, I know. I know the secrets. And like, did she? And Dororo's like, okay, I know you can hear me. Say something, come on. And Hyakkimaru is like, well, can you? I'm talking to you. So Hyakkimaru doesn't confirm whether they know Dororo is a girl or not. Doesn't confirm, but we as the audience know that he knows. But again, I feel like to Hyakkimaru, it doesn't make any difference, because when he looks at Dororo, you don't see gender, you just see a soul. So to Hyakkimaru, our feminist icon, that doesn't make a difference. Hyakkimaru is like, you're just my sibling, my little brother or sister, and I have to protect you no matter what. So your gender means nothing. But to Dororo knows that the rest of the world will react to it, whether they know or not. So that's why they, reactionarily ask Hyakkimaru if they know as well. So what a good episode. Honestly, episode 5 and 6 were among my favorites so far, but this one might be my favorite episode. I think that this one visually, the episode with Jukai, episode 3 with Jukai was really good too. Don't get me wrong. Episode 3, episodes 5 and 6 were good too. This one might be my favorite, just stylistically how good it was. And I'm going to be honest with y'all, I'm a sucker for a flashback. You give me a good flashback in an anime and I will eat it up. Some people don't like flashbacks. I love them, because it gives the writer so much freedom to go against the plot and just take a break and like give us all this character development, mainly because flashbacks are just essentially character exposition. They really are. Flashbacks are just there designed to give you exposition in a unique format, in a way that separates itself from the plot and can be intriguing and stylistic, and it gives the creator a lot of freedom. And it's kind of also a standalone little moment. So once the flashback's over, you go back to the main story and it's like a bonus in that sense. I love flashbacks as a character-driven viewer. So for me, this was fantastic. I loved this. So I'm super excited. Now that we go back to the end of the episode though, and they're talking about, so we have this guy that is from another village speaking with Daigo, and Tahomaru's around the corner listening, eavesdropping, saying there was a former midwife who worked here who had heard about a baby without limbs floating down a river. And Daigo's like, yep, so the baby floated down the river, okay, and 3 days ago, right around the time that the fever happened, a commander pursuing an Asakura spy was injured severely by an unknown man. So the timeline, I think the timeline's a little bit skewed, because we had the scene with Mio. So we had the scene with Mio and her death. And now 3 days later, we have Daigo being told about Hyakkimaru. But meanwhile, we had the scene with Mio. But then we had the snake scene with the snake demon. Then we had Sorrow. Then we had 3 more days. So so this scene right here with Daigo being told about Hyakkimaru is possibly happening while the Saru stuff is going on, and the episode we just watched hasn't even happened yet. So whatever they run up against in future episodes is playing catch up from this scene. Okay. But yeah, a commander pursuing an Asakura spy, which is Mio, which was not a spy, was injured severely by an unknown man. And Daigo's like, what? Daigo looks so old. He's gained so much gray hair over the last 16 years. And then the guy kind of like has this like he's seen some shit look. He's like, the commander said the man's arms were prosthetics. And Daigo's like, well, shit! That look on Daigo's face is like, you mean the kid that my son that I tried to kill, who has no arms and legs, is alive and also has prosthetic arms and could possibly kill a man and is connected with demonic energy and is still alive, and does he know about me? The answer is he doesn't. But Daigo doesn't know that. So Daigo's probably like, shit, is this guy going to come try to kill me? And it's like, da-da. And the lightning flashing is amazing. The lightning flashing of realization is so dramatic, so theatrical, and I love it. And then, yeah, like the flash of lightning from the storm. And then we see Tahomaru staring from aside. I want Tahomaru to find out the truth. I really do. My fear is that Tahomaru is not going to find out the truth for some time. He's going to not find out the truth until he possibly confronts Hyakkimaru randomly or however and ends up getting the wrong idea. I just want them all to be on the same page by the end of the series, but we'll see if that happens. This episode was my favorite so far. I love this episode so much. Definitely my favorite of the season. Maybe Dororo was the rule of 9, I guess. But I'm super excited as well to hear your thoughts down below. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Welcome to the new year. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yes, I will be back very soon with more of Dororo. Bye!